Have you ever wondered what your dreams mean? Join us in Dream School at thisjungianlife.com and find out. Jung wrote, "Dreams are a little hidden door in the innermost and most secret recesses of the soul."
Dream School is a unique, self-paced online program you can start at any time that unlocks access to your inner world. Our 12-month program provides the support, knowledge, and guidance you need to reach within, decipher your personal dream code, and harness it to optimize your life. By enrolling, you'll join an affirming community of fellow travelers, each pursuing a unique quest.
And it's fun. Join us on an adventure to wholeness and healing through understanding your dreams. Go to thisjungianlife.com and click on Dream School. You'll be taken to our secure checkout. Once you join, you'll get immediate access to our first 3 modules. You can get started right away. We look forward to seeing you there.
Welcome to This Jungian Life. 3 good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod.
Today we're going to explore a profound topic, something that philosophers and psychologists and analysts have mused upon perhaps for hundreds and thousands of years. What is the nature of will, and what are the ways that we access willpower? This seems particularly timely in the beginning of the new year, when we're often stirred to set new goals, to chart a course for ourselves. And while imagining a better future is always enticing, finding fuel for the engine to make that happen is something that has been a challenge for human beings since the beginning, I imagine. And so we're going to put our minds and souls to this task.
Yeah, and of course, we're going to be particularly interested in what Jung said and thought about this topic and putting a Jungian frame on it.
So what did Jung say about will and willpower, and how did he parse that out?
Well, Jung tended to equate will with ego volition. And in fact, one of the ways to think about will from a Jungian perspective is that it's the energy available to consciousness. So there's something here about our conscious intention, that will is a function of consciousness, which is going to get interesting, of course, because then where is that in relation to the unconscious? For me, this is what we're going to be circling around today.
Yeah, and I think that's where we all get tripped up over and over again, is we make a conscious decision of this is really what I should do. And then somehow, after a week or two of rigorous self-discipline and rigidity, etc., something else happens. The underdog of the unrecognized, unconscious comes rising up to bite us and say, you didn't consult me. Mm-hmm. You didn't line up with me. You didn't even, you weren't even interested in what I have to say about this. Mm-hmm. And so we have the opposites of unconscious and consciousness. If they're not aligned, consciousness can go awry.
So one of the struggles we have is finding the wellspring of energy in order to fuel the forward movement over a period of time, because many of the things that we aspire to require being approached over and over again from many different angles in many different stages. And it begs the question of, where do we access that? And I think that from a Jungian perspective, the ego or the self-conscious personality has some access to energy all by itself. And I think part of this may even be temperamental or biological. It seems that some people are born with a lot of conscious access to energy. And whether or not they apply that skillfully or not is up for debate, but they naturally have a lot of drive, access to it.
Mm-hmm.
And often in the first half of life, the ego's ability to muster and sally forth is the goal. And this is part of the archetype of the hero, that the culture tells us we should accomplish these 5 tasks, and that the ego, without any transpersonal assistance, might have enough vitality to move forward. In various places, Jung and Freud write that life force or libido is a metabolic process, that your body generates a certain amount of energy, and that energy is available to the waking personality. So often in the first half of life, we do have enough energy to chart big courses and to make progress. And then interestingly enough, in the second half of life, and towards the end of his life, Jung said with great honesty that if he didn't experience a gradient forming in his psyche in such a way that his innermost life force would or wouldn't flow towards an object or a goal, that if that didn't happen, he was incapable of taking action.
Mm-hmm.
And the ego had pretty much lost its independent vitality.
Well, I think you're lifting up here, Joseph, an interesting sort of tripartite dynamic that in the first half of life, and we certainly know from watching children, there is a life force that carries us along. Kids learn to speak. Kids learn to make friends. We are attracted to sexual and life partners. And there's a certain life force that's we sort of come with, some more than others. But we're really talking about the life instinct and how that can propel us forward, perhaps before we've really developed a certain kind of consciousness, volition, awareness, or choicefulness. And then in the second half of life, as you were talking about with Jung, there has to be more of a connection with something deeper in us, that consciousness has to be able to connect with our depths to see what's really right from the depths of our souls, if you will.
Well, and one of the ways that Jung talks about will is that it's in conflict with blind instinctuality.
Yes.
So there's that way that we've been talking about will almost as kind of life energy. And some of the things that you were talking about, Deb, of, kids kind of learning to speak and seeking things out, that almost is in the realm of the instincts. It just happens to us. We're just carried along. And at some point, when consciousness is more in the picture, will might be, again, in direct conflict with the instinct. My instinct might be to go to sleep. And my will says, no, I've got to stay up and study another 2 hours if I plan on passing that test. That's an interesting place to be. And I think, Deb, you were talking about before that when we make a conscious plan, sometimes we can get tripped up by forces in the unconscious that said, hey, you never checked with me if this is something that I actually am okay with. And that can cause us to stumble. And by the way, one of the things that I think happens is we set ourselves these goals, these conscious goals. We try to move toward them, and then we repeatedly fail. I mean, Joseph, you were mentioning that we need to have the energy to come back again and again, which I think is true. And I think in sometimes we feel like, well, I didn't do it the first time. I didn't manage to stop smoking the first time. Well, guess what? Maybe you need to try again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
There can be a way that because we don't take into account the nature of the unconscious, that we can have unrealistic expectations for ourselves, And then when we don't manage to do something the first time, we berate ourselves as failures, and we can internalize a sense of ourselves as being, worthless or whatever, because there is a kind of cultural myth that we should be able to muscle our way through to change. I want to pick up on your reference to the gradient, Joseph, because I think that's a beautiful image of partnering with the unconscious. The ego, Jung is saying there that his ego waits for kind of a signal from the unconscious that this is the right direction to go in. And I think that we're going to be returning again and again to this theme, I believe, as we discuss this. But I'm thinking I think it was a story in one of Robert Johnson's books, if I recall, where he was talking about being maybe early in his education or training. And let's say he was always late. I'm not pulling up the details, but he was always late all the time. And he wound up trying to kind of query himself, what's going on in there? Why am I always late? And he kind of sat down and just had a conversation. It was really an active imagination, a conversation with the unconscious. Why are you making me late? Why is it I can't get out the door? And the answer came back something like, again, I'm sort of making this up, but I don't want to get up and blast out the door first thing. I want time to sit down and read the paper and have a cup of coffee. You haven't been listening to me. So he kind of had it out with himself and came to an agreement that he'd wake up a little bit earlier so he could have that time to sit around and sip that cup of coffee. And after that, he wasn't late. So it is that sense that we need that conscious intention, that ego intentionality. But we're not going to be able to do it without consent or assent from the unconscious.
Right. So we are ruled by committee.
Mm-hmm.
and the conscious personality, the ego, is one person in the committee room, and that there are wantings and choosings. And so in that example, Robert Johnson may have chosen to get up at a certain time in the morning, but other inner figures were wanting to have an hour to meditate and drink coffee and read a little bit. And often we find that choosing collapses in the face of wanting, because wanting has a certain vitality about it that can be denied for only so long.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to give in eventually to that chocolate cupcake. Is that what you're saying?
Well, this is the great purifying process. Is the chocolate cupcake really what I want?
Yes.
Or is that a proxy for another level of wanting?
That's perfect.
Yeah.
So discovering the deepest want underneath perhaps a basket of images.
Mm-hmm.
So the image could be a cupcake, it could be, fresh baked bread with butter on it. And underneath that could be any number of other things which deserve attention. So there is a relationship between wanting and choosing. And for me, wanting arises organically, that on that transpersonal level, all of life, but certainly all human beings, notice a drive to bring forth. And despite whatever the culture tells us, human beings live from the inside out, despite whatever outer seeming around it. And because we live from the inside out, we are driven by this task to bring forth what is inside of us. Now, we can make a lot of hypotheses about the images that are inside of us. From a Jungian model, we believe that there is this supraordinate intelligence called the self, and that the self seeds the external personality with images, primordial images, that over time activate and command certain inner and outer circumstances because of the almost magnetic field that these images assert. one might say that when the ego can believe this is true, which is a beginning attitude, and discover some of these destinies that are placed inside of us and align with them, that this congruence creates a powerful positive engine in the personality and in the outer world, so that we are not fighting at cross purposes with our own essential nature.
Mm-hmm.
I hear that and agree, and want to add that we also work from the outside in, and that we are susceptible to all kinds of cultural influences, parental teachings and values, just plain habits. And that maybe sometimes it's not as somehow convoluted intrapsychically as we might want to put it. And where I go in that context is a sort of both and of the internal parent. And how might we use that as a jumping off place for an internal dialogue of what would your loving parent want for you? The loving parent is not punitive or critical that, you've done something wrong. You ate that cookie before dinner, bad, naughty, shaming. Neither is the parent, hopefully, just indulgent that says it's perfectly okay. Fill up on cookies. Doesn't matter. It's what you want. But where is that nurturing sense of self? That's an internal parent that relates both to the outer world and the internal world. The nurturing parent that says, no, don't have cookies right before dinner because I love you. I care about you, and your well-being depends on having a nice dinner. And then after dinner, you can have 1 or 2 cookies for dessert. That it's an easier, simpler way of having a dialogue with yourself and correcting some of the cultural influences that have just sort of seeped their way in, and also connecting with an internal image that can help us live better from the inside out.
I really like that, Deb, because I find that this is a clinical issue that comes up sometimes for people about when is it a good thing to push ourselves, for example, and when is that being overly harsh with ourselves? Sometimes it's really hard to tell. Sometimes saying, I'm going to stay up for another 2 hours to study for that exam does feel kind of punitive and harsh and disconnected from what we really need. And sometimes that actually is loving because it really matters to us to pass that exam. And how do we know what the difference is? I've had people ask me this. How do I know? How much is it right for me to push myself, to kind of drive myself forward? When is that kind and loving, and when is that self-punitive? And I like your framing around it, that it would be sort of the internal good parent. No, maybe it's time to get some rest now.
Yeah.
This will go better in the morning when you've had a good night's sleep, that kind of thing. Because it can be loving to expect a lot from ourselves.
Absolutely. But I think most people have an internal kind of a barometer or like a GPS that it's 11 o'clock at night. We have an internal way of knowing, should I stay up for another couple of hours and cram, or get some sleep, wake up a little earlier than usual, go back over my notes. Maybe there's a regret in there. I didn't study the material during the semester as much as I should have. So some recognition that a last minute cramming, we've gotten ourselves in a bit of a bind, and that extra studying isn't going to matter at the very last minute when we should have done it sooner. Live with that regret. But that it's simply an acceptance of the reality principle.
I'm not going to agree with you that most of us have that internal GPS, because certainly some of us do, but sometimes, and I think this is going to take us into a new realm, we can be controlled by a complex.
That's for sure. But that's another place to have that same dialogue of where am I, in effect, coming from? Am I coming from the depriving parent that says you're going to stay up and study until the wee early hours of the morning, whether you want to or not? Or the indulgent parent that says, oh, well, never mind, just it'll be okay. I think that's a reasonable kind of guideline of what's in my best interest in this moment around this particular decision.
Well, I think that the context that provides a sorting mechanism is the conscious establishment of a goal. But I think many of us absorb an expectation from the environment, from our parents, from the culture, and we mistake expectations with goals.
Yes.
And that becomes very, very muddy. So relative to this question of how far should I push myself this weekend in order to prepare for an exam at the university, if I don't have a clear goal of where that's leading to, then any number of other impulses inside of me may be given too much or too little space in the decision process. If I'm clear that my goal, let's say, is to get a 4.0 this year so that I can then qualify for something in the following year which meets my goal, which I'm very consciously holding and consciously crafting, then the lesser impulses inside of me could be sacrificed because I know where I want to go. If I'm just kind of surviving this semester, I'm not really sure why I'm here other than to maybe meet my parents' expectations that I should get a degree and I don't really know what I'm going to do afterwards. Then all of a sudden the voice that says, you need a lot of sleep, or boy, you're not looking that great and you probably should take some time off. All those other voices seem to carry equal weight because I'm not sure what my suffering is in service to.
Yeah. We're not connected with anything larger.
And I think that is really very, very important is what is your goal? Is it a should? I should go to college, or I should do this training program. I should quit smoking. I should lose some weight. Those are maybe expectations, as you were using it, Joseph, versus a true internal goal that I am truly in alignment with, of I'm ready for this and I want this, and it is something that goes deep in me that I can make a commitment to rather than a should.
And when people are asking themselves what is an appropriate goal for myself, which can be tempered by all kinds of different influences, one of the things that has to be present is a certain amount of desire. And to make it really concrete, that your goal has to have at least some small sexiness to it in order for it to really have any taproot down into your bones of your psyche.
Yeah.
And if that's missing, that's probably why you're not moving forward in that direction, because desire is the great engine of life. And we need at least a little bit of it.
Yeah. And when you say sexiness, I like that. And I think of it as like energy. Like someone says, I want to write a book. And you can see the little fire in their eyes, or it's that sense of aliveness and energy that we just know it when we have it. Maybe it's something small, like I want to try to make a quiche, but it's like, yes, that you can feel the ascent in your body. And that is the thing. I think you're absolutely right, Joseph, that if we hitch our wagon to a should that feels dry, empty, and lifeless, it's very hard to get going. And sometimes our ego has a plan about what we should do based maybe on cultural expectations. And it's just totally out of alignment with where the energy is. And that brings us back to your image of the gradient. Where is the energy flowing in my soul? Toward what?
Yes, and many of the shoulds in our lives, if they were creatively enhanced, could become sexy, could attract our desire nature if we thought about it in a nuanced and multivariate enough way. There's a way to imagine losing 10 pounds, which could be highly motivated. But if it just shows up as, oh, I feel like crap, I need to lose 10 pounds, like even just saying that, it's very hard to find a lot of desire around that. So we have to become artful at how we imagine the goal so that it actually attracts us and moves us towards the image.
Well, one of the things that's coming up for me as you're talking is the goal really ours?
Right.
Is it really ours? Or are we kind of floating through life, grabbing on tentatively to other people's goals for us?
Which never works.
Never works.
In the long term.
I take it down to something that's really small of the image of a quiche, for example, of like, I really want to learn how to do this. To start by practicing on what you really, truly do want in small daily ways. Do you really want to learn how to make a quiche? Do you really want to just take a walk for 15 minutes a day? Do you really want to clean out that closet? It could be anything, but something where you know this is my want, my desire, where I have some fire in the belly, as it were, to get this done. And I know that it's mine, so that you can have an experience of knowing this is a goal. This is my desire. This is where my fire is. And build on it from there rather than starting from the top down of what do I want out of life? Oh my goodness. Boy, that's like trying to climb Mount Everest. But small it down, make it chunkable, practice, and notice how you feel when you're doing it.
And there's a relationship between desire, will, success, and concentration. And one of the ways to think about the word concentration is that it focuses units of libido around an object. That what you concentrate on helps it grow in its potency. And we all can notice that when we love something, we have no problem concentrating on it. When you fall in love with somebody, you're daydreaming about them all the time. You're imagining them. You're thinking about them. You're interacting with them. You have no problem concentrating about them. When you're a new mom and that baby's in your arm, you have no problem concentrating, meditating upon the child and every nuance about them. That what we desire, we concentrate on. So that's another thing, that when we find ourselves struggling to concentrate on what we've set as a goal, that's also a sign that either we're framing it incorrectly or essentially it's not something we want. So concentration is a key around willpower.
Yeah. You know what I'm thinking about? I'm back to love based on the images you offered of a mom with a new baby or falling in love, of that it's not maybe altogether so much about thinking and feeling and planning and goals and expectations as what do I love? I love that new baby. I think about the person I'm in love with all the time. And how do we transfer some of that into self-love and self-awareness and coming from that kind of deeper feeling place in ourselves that has a soulful component and a spiritual component?
I'm going to push a little bit here because I think when we're talking about, say, falling in love with a baby, I think we're back in the realm of instinct. And it's just very easy. It's very easy to love the baby and concentrate on the baby. I think, again, Jung said that will is in conflict to blind instinct. So it might be the time, say we are in love and we are thinking about the person all the time, and all we want to do is spend all of our time with that person. And then it's time to actually get up and go to work. And we don't want to. But it's our will that gets us up and gets us out the door. And there is a place for that. There is a place for that. And it is in consciousness, and it is sometimes in direct conflict with what's in the unconscious or what's instinctual. And that might sometimes be necessary.
Maybe the examples of a mom, in love with her baby or in love with a sexual partner are too extreme. Because I'm going back to the internal image of the loving mother who exercises both love for that child and what is in your best interests. You do have to get up. It's Monday morning and it's time to go to school.
It might be that what we're saying actually is that in choosing a goal that we're going to use our will to work toward, we want to find something that we love.
Yes.
But it might be that in pursuit of that goal, there are times that you're going to have to use your will and override an instinctual pull toward, I don't know, watching another episode of your Netflix show in order to achieve the goal.
Well, we're talking about temptation of, it's Monday morning and I'm 10 years old and I'm tempted to stay in bed. It's a cold winter's day. And that's my short-term desire. But what's in my longer-term, more loving interest with a loving parent to help say, get up, get out of bed. So there's where the will comes in, but it's not divorced from what is in one's true self-interest and development, which is a function of a loving context.
We're also talking about lesser and greater desires, that there are all kinds of inner objects, inner images that have some amount of energy and they press upon us to come forth. So one of the things that we notice very commonly is we might be pursuing a basket of interests which are legitimate to us. We meet someone, we fall in love with them, and that the amount of passion for the new person is so brilliant that it eclipses the lesser desires. It doesn't kill them. It just eclipses them in the same way that when the sun rises, you can no longer see the stars, but it doesn't mean they're not there. So we've all had this experience of falling in love and all kinds of things don't matter. And then as our projections relax, or as we become acclimated to this new wonderful, desirous person, lo and behold, the smaller desires resurface. And we are interested in our career again, or we do want to paint the house. And then there's a kind of equanimity is established among the various desires that are competing for our volitional action. So I think things fade, and mothers, I think, experience this as well.
Yes.
There's the falling in love period with the baby, and then after a while, the eclipsed stars start ringing the doorbell. They're like, hello, don't forget about us. We're here, these other desires, this other objects to choose are there. Now, I think we're leaning into a conversation about the capacity to choose. And how do we understand choicefulness, Deb, as you had said earlier, which I really like. One thing I'd like to suggest is that the capacity to choose is intrinsically human. And one could say that the more choices that we become capable of making, in some way, the more human we become. And we take this for granted. For instance, if you watch a cheetah, it can't really choose how it runs, or your cat can't really choose its behavior, but we can choose. And that's why when we're looking at instinctive animals, it would be shocking to us to see your dog look at you and start walking sideways towards you. Like, that would be hilarious and bizarre because it's not in the canon of decisions. But human beings can choose to walk sideways or do all kinds of permutations of behavior by choice. Underpinnings of choice have to do with attention, the capacity to choose what we attend to naturally gives flow and movement towards discriminations, and then discriminations allow us to become aware of different choices that are possible. Now, that still leaves us in a bit of a gray area about what motivates us to make a different choice. But we can start by recognizing that we have choices, which goes to what you were saying, Lisa. I have a choice with what I do with this hour, secondary to what seems sexy to me.
Jung says at one place, will cannot coerce instinct, nor has it power over the spirit. That's partly really what we've been talking about, that the consciousness cannot force its will on the unconscious. It just is never going to work. But there is some ability for consciousness to have an input on what happens. I'm wanting to take it in a slightly different direction and talk about the necessity of bringing to bear consciousness onto the kind of fertile ground of the unconscious in order to realize a goal. Jung talks about the importance of this, that the unconscious is just in this constant state of integration and disintegration. Things are just kind of constantly built up and torn down. And it's really consciousness that comes into that and sets a goal and is able to manifest something from it. There's a little bit of a contradiction here because he's saying on the one hand that, will is never going to be able to have its way against the forces of the unconscious, but at the same time that human will and human consciousness are absolutely essential for gathering up crops. He talks about it in one place. He says, no crops are brought home by nature. Only the consciousness of man knows about crops. He gathers the apples under the trees, for they simply disintegrate if left to themselves. And that is true of our unconscious mental process. It revolves within itself. It builds up and it pulls down. It integrates and disintegrates, and then integrates again. It is like the seasons or the eternal sunrise and sunset from which nothing comes unless a human consciousness interferes and realizes the result. This is very mysterious about, when does consciousness and will get involved and to what degree? And it seems to me that then we come to this idea about the ego-self axis. That when we're setting goals, when we're deciding, when we're choosing what to attend to, when we're deciding what to devote our energy, our conscious energy toward, if we're able to be in dialogue with the self, as is implied by this concept of the ego-self axis, then we can get on the path and take it very, very far and perhaps gather many crops, perhaps gather rich crops. But if we're not listening to that, it either won't have the energy or we'll actually get tripped up, something will get in our way. And we may have to do tons of little course corrections to always make sure that we're checking in. And is this still what the self wants? Did I get off track a little bit?
Which brings us to the idea of what am I in service to?
Yes.
Not just as a human being, but even moment to moment, day to day. And that's a litmus that we can hold as we are setting goals for the new year. As I declare something, is this congruent with the wellspring inside of myself, or is it coming in tangentially? And I think what we're saying is human beings have the power to move towards objects that are chosen solely by the ego. I mean, that is a human capacity that we've evolved to be able to do. And in that way, human beings are capable of co-creating with the rest of the universe. And of course, we see that all the time. Human beings have learned how to edit genes and craft architecturally beautiful forms that nature would not have evolved. Human beings are also capable of tremendous destruction. All of those are creative acts, whether we're creating destructive and painful outcomes or creating beautiful aesthetic and healing outcomes. But some of those things are conceived solely in the human creative imagination, although it is still fueled by a certain kind of engine that we don't have full understanding of.
I'm thinking here about how to practice this, of being in touch with that inner wellspring, of what is in my best interest, just in terms of a small decision. Do I get up when the alarm clock rings, or do I put it on snooze 3 or 4 times? To practice a self-reflective little dialogue of what am I in service to? What's my value about today? What wants to come kind of into the world through me just today, in terms of, am I going to get up at 6:30 or 7 in the morning, or sleep in a little bit, so that we're practicing. And the alchemical analogy that I have here is with churning. That's a patient process. We don't see what's inside the churn, but patiently practicing and gently churning will turn that cream of indecision or not knowing into the discernment that turns it into the butter of life direction, starting with something fairly mundane, fairly daily, fairly ordinary, and builds up into, some of the larger life goals that may not be immediately apparent. Whatever it is, I'll try again to quit smoking. I'll try again to get up at a pre-decided time for the greater good. I'm going to practice. We churn.
Well, and your churning metaphor is so great, Deb. And I know you mentioned alchemy, but let's kind of give it the name. It would be the coagulatio,
yes,
wouldn't it?
Right. The coming together, the making something solid. It's an image of earthiness versus air or water.
Which is why your butter metaphor is so great, because I think I've probably talked about this on the podcast before, but I'll indulge myself again. If you've ever, most of us have not like churned butter in an old fashioned butter churn, but if you've ever, sort of done that little science experiment where you put heavy cream into just a glass jar and you shake it 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 and you shake it, nothing happens. And you keep on shaking it and nothing happens and you think it's not going to work. But you just keep on shaking it and shaking it, shaking it, still nothing happens. And then you shake it some more and nothing happens. And then you shake it some more and you shake it and you shake it. And then suddenly there's butter. And it's really a fascinating thing to watch. I think it is very similar to this psychological process that you're talking about, that you sort of work at it for a long time and there's still just liquid, but then something solid coagulates and you've got something.
And I think that as we examine the butter that we've produced and we taste it and we assess it, we can discern whether or not that was a goal that was worthy of the time we put in, whether the outcome is congruent with who we really are, or whether it was just an exercise in personal power. And then ideally we have an assessment process. Speaking about alchemy, this process of embodying the desire, living out this thing which we want, is associated with the rubedo stage of alchemy. And one of the products of the rubedo stage is the creation of the ruddy sun. And the ruddy sun, and if we think about it as S-O-N, the ruddy sun, It's this image of someone who is red with desire, red with passion, with drive. Right now, right around New Year's, we're often talking abstractly. What would it be like to achieve this? What are some goals financially, health-wise? Number of other things. It starts with the cool lunar part of the mind, where it's all kind of distant. And then what we need to go through to take those realizations into an embodied reality, as you were saying, Deb, to churn it into butter so that we actually live out these things that we've been considering. And that if we're living it out and it's congruent with our desirous nature, it should have a red cast to it, which is what the rubedo is. There's a ruddy quality to the book that you wrote, Lisa. There's a ruddy quality to the house that you bought. There's a ruddy quality to the new job that you got. It's flush and pink with blood and life force.
Mm-hmm.
And that tells us whether we have brought something into the world which is congruent with our desires, or whether after we make it, it's simply silvery and cool and indifferent, which we have the power to do, but it's a different kind of creation.
Yeah. I want to bring up a different angle to this, which is that anytime we have a goal and we're using our will to work toward it, there's always going to be a cost. And are we taking that cost into account? Are we willing to make that? Are we willing to make that sacrifice, whatever it is? I think a lot of times in our culture, there's this myth of, at least in American culture, there's this myth of you can have it without giving anything up. But everything you get, there's some cost for it. So let's say, for example, that your goal is to get a promotion and that you're working toward the promotion. And ask yourself, what's going to be the cost? And of course, there will be the cost of, the additional nights staying late at the office when we used to do such things, or whatever else you need to do to get the promotion. But then once you get it, what's going to be the cost then? Is it going to be more travel and you're going to be away from your family more? Is it going to be that you'll no longer be able to do the aspects of your current job that you really love because you will have been sort of promoted out of them? There's always a cost to everything that we get. And I think sometimes that unexamined cost holds us back because in the unconscious, we understand sometimes what's being sacrificed and we're not interested in making that sacrifice. So that's something to lift up into consciousness.
What it makes me think is everything that you purchase has to be cared for.
Yeah, that's great.
And so whether that's the job, a home, a new relationship, we've invested in this quote unquote purchase. And if we just purchase things and then we never tend to them, they have a tendency to decay, entropy being what it is. And so it's not uncommon for people to aspire to a position, attain it, and then find that they have no interest in tending what is required. They wind up kind of getting into trouble. The position doesn't work out. They're let go or they leave. So I really, really resonate with what you're saying, Lisa, that part of the imagining of acquiring something is the imagining of tending and nurturing and caring for it so that it flourishes.
Yeah, one of the images that came to my mind when you said that, Joseph, is I've worked with people who maybe grew up in families where there was hoarding or shopping kind of addiction. And you hear these stories about people going out and shopping and bringing things home and leaving them in the bag with tags on, so that there's just tons and tons of stuff still in bags that you bought, but you never even took it out and wore it.
Yeah.
And that, it's like, because it's the thrill of the purchase
Mm-hmm.
And it might be that we're going out and purchasing lots of things in life without really wanting to invest in actually having that thing.
It's the same thing about weight loss, that most people that struggle with weight have lost a lot of weight. So I've lost my 50 pounds once a year for the last 20 years. And so while the vision is to lose, and there is this desirous quest which they have succeeded at, the second part of the fantasy, which is how will I now tend this transformed body, has not been in the imagining. And then therefore it doesn't have energy.
So over and over and over again, we've been circumambulating how important consciousness is of what is it that I really want? Is it an expectation that has been imposed on me or that I've imposed on myself? Is it a true goal, whether it's a small goal or a large goal? Can we anticipate what it might be like, what the cost is going to be once we attain that goal? A reflective, conscious process so that we're not acting impulsively, we're not acting out of instinct or acting out of some sort of cultural norm or expectation, of coming alive to ourselves in this process of having that dialogue with ourselves. Or as you say, Joseph, having a committee meeting. We're ruled by committee. Well, let's all just gather around the conference table and really have it out of what's going on here, so that we know and can come from a place where consciousness and unconscious, heart, soul are aligned. This is a true goal.
Yeah. And I want to just dip into one other thing, Deb, on the heels of that. The way of individuation often requires that we surrender our conscious will. I mean, there is a time for that. And that is when the ego way hasn't been working, when it has carried us as far as it can carry us. And we don't know what else to do, or we're faced with values that have equal valence, and so we can't move in any direction. Then there is a time that we simply drop our hands and say, I don't know what to do, and we wait on the will of the self, as it were.
Mm.
And there's this image from the Irish epic of Con Eda, where he's a prince and he's the son of this fabulous king and this fabulous queen, but he's fallen under a curse. And he doesn't have many resources and he doesn't know what to do. And he's given a little shaggy horse. And he's told to get on the horse and the horse will take him where he needs to go. And he has to just drop the reins and let the horse lead him. And this is an image of a certain kind of relationship between the ego, between consciousness and the unconscious, where the ego surrenders its will and says, okay, instinct, okay, unconscious, I need you to carry me. I'm open to being carried by you. And that can be a very important place where we just give up trying to work our conscious will.
Yeah. And that takes us back to what you mentioned before, Lisa, of the ego self axis, that there is something that knows that's more than just our personal unconscious, that's imaged in the tail by the shaggy horse. That's a surrender to something greater.
And so maybe this is a good time to switch to a dream. Hi, this is Lisa from This Jungian Life podcast. Joseph, Deb, and I have been deeply moved by your responses to our work. Producing, editing, and distributing the podcast involves substantial expenses, and we need your help. Please stop by our website, thisjungianlife.com, and click on the heading Be Our Patron. You'll be redirected to our Patreon funding page. Patreon helps creators connect with people who believe in projects like ours. There, you can sign up with your credit card to support us for as little as $1 a month, and at higher levels of support, we'll provide special episodes, behind-the-scenes photos and stories, and a chance to join a select pool of listeners for dream interpretations. Thank you. Today's dreamer is a 35-year-old woman who is an artist. And there are two scenes to this dream. Scene 1, I received a huge certificate invitation that said I had been chosen for special study among others in my class. It was a big 30 by 40 inch purple and white piece of sturdy paper. At first, I thought I wasn't going to get it, but I did. Although I felt like someone had given it to me just because I was upset that I didn't get one, and it probably showed. The rest of the people who got it were the quiet, timid ones in the class, so this extra invitation or opportunity to learn presented by the certificate ensured that this was their opportunity to shine. I was with a young guy carrying stuff in an elevator that descended past the ground floor to levels A, B, C, D, E. We stopped at level E. That's where the training from the certificate scene would take place. I was eager, but also anxious about going so far down beneath ground level. We walked out of the elevator into a corridor that was of concrete blocks, and there were lights spaced out along the walls in equal distance. I had the feeling it was damp like a basement. I don't remember if we went anywhere past that. Scene 2. I saw different sized bodies of water from above. I wanted to picnic by one of them. All of them had alligators in them, so kayaking or swimming was out of the question. They were kind of marshy with different vegetation growing around. I was with a girl. We picked a small pond and sat on its edge on something like a concrete slab that had a built-in bench-like feature. I was carrying two small transparent organisms in my hand that I had to make sure not to lose and not let them die. They were cup-shaped. I was incredibly careful when placing them on the concrete and went to pick some tiny vegetation from the edge of the lake for them to rest and feed on. We talked, and I noticed that one organism was trying to eat or hump the other, except they weren't cup-shaped anymore, but rather elongated, resembling an ancient, less developed, and very basic in structure insect with wings, like bee wings. They were still transparent. I think I tried to separate them, but didn't want to hurt them, so I didn't really intervene much, just kind of worried a bit if I should and how to intervene. So for context, she says, I started analysis 3 weeks ago, and I've had only 3 sessions so far. I had been feeling like I need some extra help in figuring out who I really am and whatever it is that has been blocking me all these years. I am unsure still of my connection with the therapist. And the main feelings in the dream, she says, I felt entitled in the first part of the dream, then a bit anxious going down the elevator, then in total awe of these two creatures and a huge sense of responsibility towards them. For extra context, she says that she had repeated elevator nightmares when she was a kid. The elevator always went up and through the roof, or I was stuck in between floors, but always on the top floor. So I always think it's interesting to chunk dreams into scenes because then it makes it easier to see how they interrelate. And this has been done very clearly with this dream and has 2 very distinct scenes. So in the first scene, she gets this large special certificate or invitation. And it's maybe a little bit of an image of a kind of inflation. I mean, purple, for one thing, is associated with royalty, and it can kind of be a color of a kind of premature individuation, a sort of not really ready for it, initial grasping at something, which may be, again, a sort of inflated state, but it can also be like that first image of the Grail that the knights get when they're starting off on their quest. They see it, and then they know what they're going after. And this big invitation and special award that she even feels a little bit sheepish about, I think, in the dream, because she says, I felt entitled. But it may be that, this is what you're going after, and you may not be quite ready for it yet. And maybe you are a bit full of yourself, but sometimes we need that inflation when we're starting out on our individuation journey. So she's just begun analysis. And sometimes that's what the beginning of analysis is like. It can be very inflating. We can feel like we're off on our magical quest. And that can both be a bit awkward, but it can also be an important thing that propels us forward.
I'm seeing a bit more of ambivalence in this very first part of the dream. I thought at first I wasn't going to get it, but I did. And then did I get it just because I was upset is the implication in the next part.
Kind of a spoiled brat, and so they gave it to me.
Oh, okay, here, go ahead then if you want it that badly, or something like that. And then I think it's noteworthy that the rest of the people who got it were the quiet, timid ones in the class. And then there's this promise of the extra invitation by the certificate ensured that this was an opportunity for people to shine. Mm-hmm. So I see this sort of unworthiness. Am I coming from the right place? But then again, the quiet, timid ones have been given a chance to shine. I think it really relates a lot to her talking about having just started analysis and the wanting something and not sure yet exactly how this is going to unfold.
Well, and the way that inflation can be the opposite coin of feeling unworthy.
Yep.
And I think both of them are here. What it reminds me of a little bit is I still remember the day I got into analytic training. And I know I'm not the only one to have had this experience, but they call you into a room and they say, congratulations, you've been accepted. And they, give you some paperwork, or at least that's how they used to do it. And I sat there thinking the whole time, they've made a mistake. I wasn't really supposed to be here. They've made a mistake. They're going to tell me, oh, we're so sorry. We called you in by mistake. You actually didn't get in. and I've talked to so many people that had a similar on the one hand, it's like this incredibly kind of enlarging experience to do something like begin analysis. It's like, who, me? But am I? I'm just the. Who me? Really? I'm meek little Dorothy. Have I been called? Have I been chosen to step forward?
Yeah.
And then there's another part of us that's like, wow, I was chosen to step forward.
Yeah. And did they really know what they were doing? Because in the dream ego says, I felt like someone gave it to me because I was upset. Mm-hmm. So did I get it for the wrong reasons?
Right. But I wanted it. But it goes back to what we were talking about. Now I'm going to have to live up to it. Oh, now what? So then the next scene is she's in the elevator that goes way down 5 floors, which is where the training from the certificate scene would take place. And she's eager but anxious about going so far beneath ground level. And then there are concrete blocks and lights, and it feels damp like a basement. Well, there's the descent. And isn't that a great image of analysis of the unconscious, of we go down? Yeah, we're going to go deep.
And Jung had a famous dream about going down and down and down levels until he finally came to a little under the basement with a dirt floor and 2 skulls. So it's sort of like, what have I gotten myself into here?
Whenever Joseph is quiet in the first part of us talking about a dream, I always know that he's cooking. and probably elaborate and brilliant interpretation.
Okay, we're ready for your elaborate and brilliant interpretation, Joseph.
All right. Elaborate is guaranteed. Brilliant is not. So in the beginning, I really agree with both of you mentioning that there is a compensatory element in the dream, that, it's not just an invitation, but it's this enormous, oversized, almost 3 foot by 4 foot invitation.
Yeah.
It's so exaggerated, and the invitation's exaggerated because the psyche would defend against it in some fashion. And the psyche does defend against it. Even though you've received the invitation, the ego does try to devalue it by saying, oh, it doesn't mean anything. It's just because I was upset. So the psyche is well aware of her struggle to experience herself as the invited one,
Mm-hmm.
and which implies that in her day-to-day life, she feels like the uninvited one or the overlooked one. And so the dream is giving her a compensatory experience. She's chosen and special amongst the others in the class. So the first movement in the dream is differentiation from the collective, which is very much in the task of analysis. Even right at the beginning, we know that the analysis is going to focus on the ways that she is unique, different from the collective. And there's something very exciting about that, and something that, of course, makes her extraordinarily visible. So there's an opportunity to shine or to be seen. Obviously, the dream ego finds some aspect of that exciting. And this opportunity to be visible is being offered to the introverts, the timid, quiet ones in the class. So what I imagine is that the dream maker is preparing her for the process of extroverting her inner objects. Particularly for introverts, or for any of us that have any trauma background, there's a tremendous amount of life that's hidden inside that we talk to about with ourselves, or perhaps not even with ourselves. And the shining is in the analysis, finding these inner objects, truths, images, memories, goals, ideals, pain, and bringing them out into the stage of the analytic consulting room so that they can shine and she can be made visible. The dream maker is helping her feel that this is going to be a positive process. And yes, it can be inflated to get all of that attention. I think we all go through this. In the beginning of the analysis, it can feel very narcissistically gratifying to be the only one talking for an hour. And the analyst can be used in a healing way as the audience for the displaying of the inner objects. And yes, it is a little inflating, which is a natural part of the process.
Yes, definitely, yes.
The psyche immediately moves into a kind of deflating reaction. So as soon as she's very excited about the shining, the young man, who's doing, by the way, not a particularly exciting process, he's just carrying a bunch of stuff down a freight elevator, and she's kind of coming along for the ride into the dark, dank basement of herself. As often happens, we show up the first 3 sessions, we're talking about ourselves and often talking about the parts of ourselves that we enjoy displaying for other people. And then lo and behold, your analyst starts to make an interpretive comment or nudge you in a hidden direction that isn't bright and shiny, but is dank and damp. And the game is on.
And so what do we think about these 2 cup-shaped creatures?
Before we go to the cup-shaped creatures, I'm aware that, and I think it built on what you were just saying, Joseph, of these different bodies of water that she wants to picnic by. but all of them have alligators in them. So kayaking or swimming was out of the question, marshy, etc. So I'm thinking here's that same juxtaposition of the picnic and yet the dangerous reptilian devouring forms in the water seems to kind of mirror the shining and the damp, dark basement of both of those things exist.
Yeah, the waters are somewhat perilous, and you need to respect them.
Yeah, and then to go to the creatures of these two organisms, make sure not to lose them and not let them die. That they're cup shaped.
One of the things that comes up for me is, so first of all, we perhaps have a shadow figure here in this girl that she's with, although we don't hear much about that. But there's some fragile new life that she now has.
That's receptive.
So there's something that's receptive.
Cup shaped.
There's something new in the unconscious. There's a new attitude. There's some new content. And it needs to be lovingly protected. And she's doing that.
Yes, she does. But then one organism is trying to eat or hump the other. And they're not cup-shaped anymore, but elongated, resembling an ancient, less developed, basic kind of insect structure with wings. So already they have morphed.
And they're going quickly.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have a place down in North Carolina that is besieged by mayflies. Like the whole house will be covered with them. So I've often thought about the life cycle of mayflies. And this image reminds me of that, that the female lays eggs in the water. And that once they hatch, they're called nymphs. And they're these strange kind of aquatic creatures. But there comes a pivotal moment where the nymph still in the water becomes the sub-imago, is what it's literally called. And it's transitioning from being kind of shrimp-like, and it starts to sprout wings, and it starts moving very wildly in the water. It takes about 30 seconds, and then it begins to emerge from the water and becomes sexed and prepares to swarm and mate in the sky. So this transition from the nymph into the sub-imago with wings and movement and instinctive drives are beginning to emerge. And she's unsure whether the instinctive drives are cannibalistic, are they sexual, are they both? But it suggests that as she is approaching these primordial waters, her own instincts are beginning to buck and hump and bite, and she has to develop some kind of relationship to that.
It's a great image, isn't it, of beginning analysis or the beginning of something new, of that process of transformation from something, just cup-shaped to something that is more differentiated, which we talked about happening at the beginning of the dream, that the differentiation from the rest of the class and being chosen and going down to the basement, and the differentiation from these two sort of amorphous creatures to insect-like creatures. And she's not so sure about them. What are they doing? Are they humping? Are they one of them trying to eat the other? What's going on here with this new life emerging?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that comes up for me that I find incredibly positive about the dream is she's so reverent toward these creatures.
Yes.
Right.
She's so careful in putting them down and in picking the vegetation. And then even she doesn't want to intervene too much, which I think is a good thing. She's watching this process. She's like, oh, should I intervene? I don't want to hurt them. So there's some understanding that this is a natural process that's very ego alien, that you might just have to let unfold. And it's so interesting that are they eating? Are they humping? Because sometimes, the truth about giving birth to something new is it requires a certain kind of violence. I mean, penetration of the sexual act and childbirth. I mean, it's, procreation, generativity can look unsavory. And I wonder if they're not humping rather than cannibalizing, but to her eyes, the ego eyes, it looks like, oh, is that okay? But meanwhile, there's perhaps something really generative going on.
I'm also aware of how a certain kind of naivete or, seeing maybe the analytic process or life through sort of the proverbial rose-colored glasses is being penetrated here. That in the second part of the dream, she wants to picnic by one of these ponds. But one of them, they've got alligators in them. And then there are these tiny little transparent cup-shaped organisms, which seem very innocent. And then they turn into insect-like structures that are humping or maybe cannibalizing. It's not all going to be a lovely, warm, pretty, picnicky process. This new life, as you were saying, Lisa, has a lot of edgy qualities to it, but it is alive.
Yeah, I mean, she says she's unsure about her connection with this analyst, and I guess we'll have to see, but it does seem like something's alive.
My thought here is who can tell whether this is the right fit or not, but something is really stirring in psyche that has, in 3 sessions, been mobilized by this analyst. But it's not all warm and fuzzy and painted in pretty pastels.
I'm wondering if the girl at the picnic with her is the analyst. Because much like an analyst, the analyst kind of goes where the client wants to go and is a witness with them. And the way the girl is just kind of a quiet presence as she's sorting out, the dreamer is sorting out her relationship to things, I think suggests that the analyst is probably a good fit, can go to the water's edge with her in a non-interfering way while she's having experiences. I think that's propitious and I think helpful. I also imagine that the alligator, represents the autonomous psyche, and perhaps as an artist, she already has brushed up against this. I'm sure she has as an artist, actually. So that she goes rather quickly to the waters that are full of life that is enormously powerful, ancient, and as you had said, Lisa, non-human or difficult to relate to. So in this heroine's journey, she has an opportunity to learn something about the alligator, which she chooses not to. And so the dream maker gives her an experience of encountering the alligator in its tiny mayfly-like version. So I feel like the two creatures that she's laid on the leaf and the alligator really are the same force.
Yeah.
Both are instinctive, primordial, strangely non-human. But the second one, she can tolerate.
Yeah, she can relate to.
Close to, more relatable. But the alligators in her are waiting to be known and respectfully understood and engaged. I think if this were a dream that someone brought to me in the beginning of the analysis, I would think this is a dream that predicts the course of the analysis and that it's really positive.
You've been listening to This Jungian Life. From our website, thisjungianlife.com, you can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, help us produce future episodes by funding us through Patreon, and submit your dreams for possible interpretation on another episode. We'd like to thank our listener who shared a dream for today's show and hope you'll let us know what topics you'd enjoy hearing more about. Until next time, keep living this Jungian life.